I hear an echo. I'm not sure if anyone else does. I also work at the CTL, and I just defended my dissertation in the Department of English. So I am kind of still a graduate student as I wait to graduate.
Okay. Awesome. So I'm just going to try to share my screen here. It's being slow, so hopefully it'll work. Sorry, it's taking a while. Okay, can you see it?
1 minute. It usually takes a second. We see your applications folder.
Oh, okay. Okay, maybe this will work. No. Sorry, it's being so slow. I don't want to share this. Let's try this again. Okay, what about now?
Hey, we see it. It looks perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, welcome to the session. We've kind of designed this so that we're leaving quite a bit of time for questions and discussion at the end. I'm sure you have a lot of discipline-specific questions. So we're going to start with questions to consider, just things that you should clarify for yourself and your course to make sure that you're able to really effectively support your TAs in all of these different new responsibilities that they're going to have. Then we're going to go through how to build a communication plan so that you're communicating effectively with your TAs and that all of those expectations are really clear. And then we're going to kind of do a wrap up with some of the best practices for working effectively with TAs that should kind of go across disciplines, hopefully. And then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. Okay, and if you have any questions as we're going, feel free to throw them into the chat and someone will be monitoring them and they can interrupt me and we can answer as they come up. So don't be shy about throwing questions into the chat. So when you're getting started thinking about your course, it's always good to think about what are your TA's previous teaching experiences. So some TAs might be really experienced. They might be in their PhD and have TA'd several different courses for lots of different years. But they also might be coming into it for their first time. So being really mindful of the different kinds of experiences and levels of confidence that you might have in your course. And with that in mind, thinking about what kind of training you will have to provide to your TAs. There's a lot of differences across departments. Some departments do departmental training and course-specific training that is, of course, paid and part of TA's contracts. So thinking about whether that is something that's offered in your department or if you're going to be doing the majority of training and connecting TAs with resources and thinking about what you might have to do for that. So we actually just launched the TA toolkit. So the CTL had their transforming teaching toolkit and the EDAs have compiled a TA toolkit that goes through a lot of the different kinds of roles and responsibilities that TAs will have, and we've compiled best practices and other kinds of resources that TAs might find helpful. So this might be something you want to look through and think about what's going to be relevant to your course. And these are things that you could bring up with your TAs, you can direct them there, but you can also go over this in TA meetings, right? So that you're really kind of going over that with your TAs and that they're getting the kind of support that they need and are able to ask you questions as those things come up. Another thing to consider is what kind of professional development opportunities you can provide. So your TAs might have different kinds of professional goals. One thing you might be able to do is offer them guest lecturing sessions, especially in this remote delivery context, having the opportunity to deliver an lecture. For them.
Sorry, can you repeat that? Because that didn't...
I wonder if it's me or if it's Yeah, so what kind of professional development opportunities you can provide, especially in this remote delivery context. Having the opportunity to provide some kind of online lecture might be something that students or your TAs are really interested in, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. Another thing could be, even if you get some of the more experienced TAs to help you develop rubrics or that kind of thing, keeping in mind that that should be a part of the contract if you're helping them, having them develop course-specific resources. But that's also something some TAs might be really interested in, having that opportunity to help rework assignments or develop rubrics for grading. So getting a sense of who your TAs are, what their goals are, and how you can best support them in both their responsibilities in the course and also their longer term teaching and academic goals. And then thinking about what your TA's roles will actually be in your course and how you're going to communicate that role to students. So are your TAs going to be mostly grading? Are they going to be facilitating tutorials? Are they going to be monitoring discussion? Are they going to be running labs? What are they actually going to be doing? And how will you tell students that so that they have a really clear sense of who their TAs are, what they can rely on their TAs for, and what that responsibility means? And we have an example on this next slide of how you can maybe communicate that in your syllabus.
So this is an example from one of my previous syllabi. So first, during one of the opening classes in the year, I made sure that my TAs were attending, and then I asked them if they were comfortable introducing themselves. They could also have a little blurb if they feel comfortable, or a photo on the on cue, just so that, especially for remote learning, they feel like more of a real human and not just a robot marking all of the students' work. This is a section that I like to include in my syllabi. It says, your TAs. Throughout the year, TAs grade your papers and provide helpful, instructive feedback on how to improve your skills. I want to encourage you to contact your TAs, either through email or ideally office hours, to discuss your ideas, challenge questions posed by lecturers, and develop thought processes for the essays. They're a skilled, intelligent, and invaluable resource for you as we work our way through the year. So this is just to kind of hopefully motivate students to go to office hours. I find that especially in the beginning of the year, office hours are not always very well attended. And I really want to push that idea that it's there for you for a lot of things, not just looking over a final idea for a assignment, but also to just consider ideas and talk. And that's something that I also try to communicate in class, is what is an office hour. And then the second paragraph is, by course policy, TAs are not permitted to read full drafts of your paper. As I said, I'm in the English department. They can, however, look over thesis statements and offer feedback on things like argumentation, diction, direction, and controversy. For additional writing resources, look at the resources section of the on cue. So I find that having this here right from the beginning of the year makes it easier for my TAs to know what they can refuse. So full drafts are something that I don't want the TAs to be pressured, and right away telling the students that they cannot read full drafts, they're not going to bring them to the TA. We have a question from Max. Now that we pivot to remote teaching, do we expect office hours turn out to be much higher? I think it's one of those things that it'll depend on the class and the students within your class. So when I do online courses and when I'm TAing for online courses, some courses I will have tons of emails every week, and other courses I'll hear from maybe 2 students, and they'll only reach out the week that the essays due. So it says, especially based on the end of last term. So perhaps that suggests that Max received a lot of communication with students at the end of last term. Is that correct? But basically what I found is that it's really student specific. But I would recommend setting up some kind of virtual office hours, whether they're weekly or based on points during the schedule where it's going to be particularly busy, and not just for yourself, but also for your TAs. I think that can help to eliminate a lot of the miscommunication that happens when you're trying to primarily deal by email. So having that kind of virtual, but like face-to-face dialogue can help.
Yeah, a lot of this webinar, we talk a lot about communication plans, just because there might be, you're not actually seeing students as much, and it is definitely possible that you might get more communication from students. So having those really clear outlines will definitely help kind of streamline some of that or get rid of some of the confusion. Awesome. Okay, so then continuing on with clarifying your TA's roles, and this kind of gets at a little bit of what Nevina was saying with TAs not looking at full drafts and having that really clearly communicated. Thinking about how much help is too much. So what kind of assistance should TAs be giving to students, and what kind of assistance should they not be giving to students? So that example Nevina just gave is a great one. It's good to let the students know that right off the bat, and TAs know immediately that they can refuse that and have course policy to point to if students are upset about it. What kinds of questions should they be asking or answering? If the answer is in the syllabus, is it okay to just say, the answer is in the syllabus, or do you want them to be actually assisting the TAs? So giving them a bit of clarity on what they should be helping with and what they shouldn't be. And that really can help TAs stay within their contract hours as well, when they know what kind of help they're giving and what kind they're not. So if your TAs are leading discussions or tutorials, how should those sessions be run? Sometimes there's some confusion about what TAs can do in the tutorial space. Do they have a lot of freedom to present new kind of material and perspectives and ideas? Or do you want them just reinforcing what is said in the lecture and answering questions about lecture material? So how much freedom do they have to kind of structure that space and maybe bring in some new perspectives, videos, that kind of thing? Should the TAs be mostly getting students to speak, or should they be kind of preparing a bit of a lecture, like a mini lecture themselves that's clarifying the lecture? So what do you actually want your TAs to be doing within that tutorial space? And that can be especially helpful for TAs that might be new to tutorials. Another thing you can do is provide kind of guiding questions that the TAs can draw off of if they're having a really hard time getting students to speak, or they're not really sure where to start. That can be a really helpful thing that they can then have some structure going into that tutorial, that they're not kind of working from scratch.
I know that when I was leading a tutorial under Dr. Pierce, he actually created a separate on cue for the TAs, and then we had the same schedule as on the undergraduate student schedule for tutorials, but in ours it had ideas of what you could do for your tutorial. I know that other instructors that I've worked for have instead asked for kind of like a recap at the end of each week, like 1 or 2 sentences that just says how the tutorial went, if there were any issues that came up. One of the things I also want to bring up in terms of how much is to help, what kind of assistance should TAs give? One of the things that really helped me when I was TAing, especially for an online course, was I had an instructor who would CC me whenever he spoke to one of the students in my TA section. So I knew that our advice wasn't in contradiction. He also offered that I could CC him if I was having a conversation with a student and maybe it was getting a little heated and the student was emotional about a mark, or there was something that I just felt like I needed help with, just so that I had that extra layer of knowing that the instructor was aware what was going on and they could help me if I felt I needed help.
Awesome. Yes, then moving on to labs. If your TAs are running labs, what are they doing in those labs? What's the scope of their responsibilities? So are they designing or revising experiments? Are they giving demonstrations? I don't have a lot of experience with labs, but just kind of figuring out what's going on in that space and what TAs are expected to do. And I imagine they're going to look quite different with the online remote context. So I think the more kind of advice you can give and the more you can delineate those responsibilities, the better. And being really conscious that things might come up as people get more into their duties as well. And then the last piece, kind of figuring out if your TAs are going to be responsible for synchronous activities, asynchronous activities, or both. So I know a lot of courses do have a time slot, and some instructors are using that for like face-to-face kind of time with certain students or tutorial time. So how much time are TAs going to be spending live with students, and how much is going to be more kind of maybe facilitating discussions on an online context through on cue? That's asynchronous. So are they doing one, the other, or are they doing both? And being really clear about that.
Especially because this term might pose some new challenges and possibilities for TAing. I think it's a great idea to remind students or to remind your TAs at the beginning of the year that PSAC has a hour counter that they can use to keep track of their hours. They might not know right away how long things will take them. So just a good idea to let them know right away to keep track of their hours, and if their hours aren't working out how you might have initially thought they would at your first TA meeting or on the contract, just to give you a heads up.
Yeah, things might take longer and new duties might come up also that you didn't anticipate in this. So being really open to receiving that feedback from TAs would be really helpful. Okay, educational technology. So I think a lot of people are going to feel a little bit out of their element with some of the educational technology. I know that I definitely will. So thinking about what equipment and educational technology your TAs are going to need to know how to use. Are you using primarily OnCue? Are you using something like Piazza? Are you using Zoom? What are you actually going to be using? What do TAs need to know how to use? And how are you going to support them in learning how to use that technology? So maybe you have a meeting at the beginning before term where you all go through the technology together and TAs learn how to use it. They see what's going on, different kinds of issues that could come up, so that they feel like they have a really good sense of how to actually use that technology. The CTL also has some really good resources in the Transforming Teaching Toolkit, as well as in the TA Toolkit, that goes through some different platforms and some good resources that you can go through and you can direct TAs to as well. So thinking about how you're going to ensure that TAs have all of that information, all of the resources they need to help themselves and also students navigate that technology. Because I imagine TAs will end up getting lots of emails from students about issues that they might be having with the technologies. So making sure that you're setting up a plan so TAs feel confident answering that, or if they don't, they know who to send those students to be able to answer those questions. And that's kind of getting at the next slide here. What plans do you have in place for technological issues? So how are TAs going to deal with these issues if they come up? If they maybe are having internet connections, things are being really slow, like I was having earlier, it's hard to kind of get on sometimes. How do you expect TAs to deal with those? What are the contingency plans? And how should TAs support students who may be experiencing those technological difficulties as well? And what kinds of technological difficulties should TAs be supporting students with? Or should they be passing them off to ITS or forwarding them to you? What is your plan kind of that way for those kinds of issues? I'm sure they will arise, especially at the beginning of the term. Okay.
Okay. So this next slide is on communicating with students. How do you expect students to communicate with TAs and vice versa? How and how often do you expect TAs to hold office hours? So these are all things that are usually decided or discussed in that kind of first meeting when you go over your contract and assigning all the hours. And I think it's fair to, if you want to have like specific weekly office hours, you can tell your TA that, but I think it's also good to give the TA a little bit of leeway and say, see what happens when you hold office hours the week before, or reach out to your students asking them when they would like to hold office hours or when they would need office hours. And also remind the TAs that it might be beneficial if they are doing weekly office hours to put them at different times during the day, especially because of the remote teaching. Not all the students will be on campus. They might have other responsibilities. They might also be in different time zones. So that's something else that will need to be considered if we're doing remote office hours. And how will you support TAs in engaging students? So welcome video post, establish expectations and guidelines for communication and participation, consider creating a rubric for participation and communication, outline what a post looks like. So these are all options. I know that a lot of instructors are doing introductory videos for their OnCue, but the idea that your TA could do the same thing, especially if you're in a course where the TA is the first line of communication for your students. There could also be discussion boards, and they could each be separated by different TA groups. And then this last one, a rubric for participation. It depends if participation is something that will be graded. I know that I've been reached out to by instructors who are asking about how attendance works for these online courses. And one option has been to, instead of marking attendance, mark a participation. And that could be a post on the discussion board. One of the things that I've learned in a webinar recently that was really beneficial was the idea that if participation is necessary by discussion board, to make sure there's a time limit. If it's one discussion board post this week, that generates a better discussion among students and with the TA than 2 discussion posts over the course of the whole term, because everyone might just post in the last couple of days of term and there hasn't really been time for a fruitful discussion.
And then with that second one, establishing expectations and guidelines for communication and participation, there's also a section in our TA toolkit if you want to direct TAs to that of how they can do that with students as well. So there are resources available for that.
And this next one is on establishing a clear communication plan. So I did draft an example of a communication plan that we'll consider shortly, but one second, there's a lot of rumbling. I think somebody near me is doing laundry, so I'm just going to move to hopefully a quieter room. Okay. Okay, sorry about that. So establishing a clear communication plan, one that considers methods of communication. So as we discussed, these might be different in the remote teaching. The types of issues students should contact you versus the TAs. So that could be things like extensions. Perhaps you want your TAs to do extensions. Perhaps you want all extensions to go directly through you. Frequency of communications. How often will you be in touch with the TAs? How often should TAs be in touch with students? So some people like to do these weekly check-ins or every 2-week check-ins. Others, it's more of whenever you need me, please reach out. The same with students. If there are students who aren't submitting things, do you want the TAs to reach out to them? Do you want your TAs to reach out to students before the assignment to say, hey, I'm here in case you need any help? Or is it basically whatever you decide is your the frequency of communication, if it's going to be scheduled or if it's something that's going to be more natural? And then again, this leads back into the previous thought, but how often should students be communicating in terms of discussion boards and things like that? And a contingency plan for communication should internet technology issues arise. And that's not necessarily just if the instructor, the TA, is having technology issues, but what happens if a student has, you know, what if they're in a remote area and they don't have the same capabilities as other students? How are you going to account for that? Are there going to be alternative ways to make up those participation marks?
Okay, so we're going to look at an example, see how this changing my screen goes. Hopefully it'll work.
And we will be able to share this if anybody is interested in the example. I can put it into the chat box.
Stop sharing, go back. Oops. Okay. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Yay, okay, awesome. There we go.
Okay, so this is the communication plan I drafted, just an example, from instructors to TA, and it would be sent out at the start of term. So I drafted it for my discipline, so in English, and this is just how I would set up the communication plan for the term. So welcome to English, whatever. I'm Nevina Martinovic, and I'm the instructor of the course. I'm looking forward to working with you. Here's some information regarding our upcoming course and our responsibilities moving forward. Course syllabus. So this is just in preparation for our first meeting. Please look over the course syllabus. This is where it's available. Please read it in its entirety and let me know if you have any questions. Just so that everyone's aware that at the first meeting we want to actually be productive. And I've divided it into these 3 communication sections. So communication between instructor and TAs, communication between instructor and students, and communication between TAs and students, just so that it's very clear. So the first I set up was instructor and TAs. We'll be having an orientation meeting. I said it would be on Zoom or in person. So I, you know, just in case somebody, in some situation, we eventually meet our TAs in person again. To go over the syllabus and discuss the course, we will also go over OnCue and how to navigate the assignments and discussion board. So the assignment page can be a little overwhelming the first time you have to download and upload assignments. Some students or some TAs don't realize you could download all the assignments in one file and then re-upload them in one file. So these kind of things are nice to show. If it's through a Zoom or Teams meeting, you could do this kind of screen share and actually go through it. I've also seen people give instructions that have screenshots of the on-cue, which really helps when trying to find certain buttons. The next would be, in this instance, marking meetings. So the main responsibility as a TA in an English course or this English course would be to grade 3 essays and the final exam. These are the weeks the essays are due. So we will have a marking meeting a few days after each essay deadline. I will send out a doodle poll a week in advance to find a time that works for everyone. So my thinking here was once all the essays are in, since they're all available online, all the TAs can download the same 2 essays. We can each mark them up in advance and give feedback. And then when we meet at our meeting, it'll be more productive and we can talk about the things that we would point out to a student, make sure that we would all be about the same, give it about the same grade. So hopefully we're all in the same, if it's an A paper, the same couple of percent range. It's a B paper, that's still the same percent range. So just to kind of go over expectations, what kind of comments we would be leaving, how we would be marking a paper. And then email. I'm always available by email. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, comments, concerns. I will get back to you within 48 hours. And one of the best things to do is to model the types of emails you would want, model the email that you would want your TA to send to their students. So get back within 48 hours. And also I try to open the emails with, hi, thanks for reaching out. Trying to make it a little less robotic and more human, and to have that thanks for reaching out, because I do get a lot of students who email me, no matter, even if it's a regular working hour, even if it's a week before the essay, I still get students emailing me, I'm so sorry for bothering you. And I want to make it clear, like, you are not bothering me. I welcome people emailing me. More people should email me about the essays, especially a week in advance. So just to kind of have that etiquette of professional but friendly and encouraging this kind of communication and reaching out. The next section that I have is communication between instructors and students. So for this course, I wrote, I will be in charge of monitoring the discussion board. If I wanted my TAs to do it, I would put it under the TA section. And I would always also make sure to say, this is about how much time you should be allotting for monitoring the discussion board. So don't monitor it every hour. Try to do like a chunk of time every other day so that you're not eating into all your hours constantly going back to check the discussion board. Extensions. I will take care of all extensions and accommodation requests. If a student reaches out to you, please advise them to contact me by email instead. If you would prefer that they forward you, that's fine, but I feel like I sometimes can lose those forwarded emails, so it's easier if the student just messages me directly. But letting the TA know that as soon as a student reaches out for an extension or accommodation request, they can just pass it on. So the question from Ping is, I'm wondering with the number of TA hours, are you or the department assigned a fixed number of hours for your TAs, or your TAs just keep track of their hours and report it at the end of term? The way that it's worked in my department is that the TA is allocated a certain number of hours, and then together we decide how many hours they need for each part of their contract. So whether it's answering emails or assignments. In the English department, we have stipulations for how much time a TA needs to mark a certain assignment. So if it's 1,000 words, I think they get 25 minutes. If it's 1,500 words, they get 30 minutes, things like that. So you want to keep those guidelines in mind when you're assigning hours for the assignments, especially knowing that some newer TAs might take longer. And if the TA finds that they're going too close to their hours, they should be able to reach out to you and try to work something out. So perhaps you could take on one of their office hours and they could take that time to mark, whatever works for you, or you could mark the final exams if they don't end up having that time. Okay. I hope that answered the question. Yeah. So It also doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, the TA has all the extensions or the TA does none of the extensions. The way that I did it in my last course, which worked out, was everybody got the option to have an extension on one of their assignments, and the TAs could handle that extension. It just had to be asked for a week in advance. And then any last minute extensions due to an extenuating circumstance would go through the instructor. So there's also a way to divide it like that, where perhaps some things are through the instructor and some things are through the TA. As long as it's communicated clearly, I don't think that that kind of shared labor is a problem. Yeah, you might also find, I know that in our department, MAs versus PhDs have different number of hours because the PhDs are required to lecture. So that could also be something that you encounter when you see the hours that students get. So the next section is communication between TAs and students. And this is the kind of communication that's hopefully already been modeled in your interaction with your TAs. So email. Send out a welcome email introducing yourself at the beginning of term. Students will contact you most frequently by email. Try and get back to emails within 48 hours. I recommend thanking students for reaching out to you in the opening lines of your email. I said email a lot, but just to be clear. In the syllabus, I've advised students as to my email policy. They must wait 48 hours after receiving an assignment back before contacting you. This is to give them time to read all the feedback. So I found that this leads to a less frantic rush of emails immediately after an assignment gets posted. So I like to have that 48 hours. And then emails sent in the 24 hours before an assignment is due are not guaranteed a response to adhere to the 48-hour policy. So this is something that the TAs know, and it's also in the syllabus so that the students aren't expecting to hear back within an hour for all of their emails. It also helps the TA to keep track of their hours better by answering emails in chunks as opposed to having to check their email every 20 minutes, every hour. And finally, office hours. I recommend holding office hours by appointment or in the weeks immediately before or after assignments are due, as these are the times that students will most likely reach out to you. Keep track of your hours using the PSAC hour tracking app. And then at the end, I just wrote, I look forward to seeing you all next week. Please fill out the attached doodle so that we can find a time that works for everyone. Sarah asked if I would mind sending the example out by email, and I can absolutely do that. That's no problem.
Thanks. Okay, I'm just going to try to get back to the PowerPoint. Okay. Okay, so we're just about done and then we'll leave some time for questions and discussion. So just to kind of sum up some things to keep in mind for working effectively with TAs. So connect the TAs with the information and resources they need to do their jobs effectively. So whether that's kind of pedagogical training or whether that's educational technology resources. And the CTL is a really good resource for that. Even for professional development opportunities, we as EDAs offer things like consultations. If the TAs are experiencing some kind of difficulty in their tutorials or aren't sure if they need more active learning strategies, they can reach out to us and book a consult for any kind of issue they're facing, as well as classroom observations. So we do that in person, but we also have done it online, and we will be doing that in the fall. And so we can go in and observe a tutorial or a lecture and provide some feedback, and then write the TAs a letter that can go into their teaching dossiers. So trying to figure out what kinds of resources are out there so that you can connect your TAs with those as issues come up. Communicate all course policies to TAs for both everyday and exceptional circumstances. So just as we saw in the communication plan, things like extensions, regrade requests, all of that kind of stuff. Make sure it's really clear so TAs know. And things may come up that you haven't clarified, so just being open to answering those questions. And if things do come up, making sure you're communicating it to all the TAs, not just one TA who brought it up. Hold marking meetings and provide rubrics when possible to ensure that all TAs are on the same page, everyone feels confident grading the assignment, and the students are getting the same level of feedback and the same kind of amount of substantial feedback. And there's resources in our TA toolkit that go through kind of what a benchmarking or marking meeting session is and some tips for going through that. Whether you're leading it or a lead TA is leading it, it can be a good resource to go through and make sure that you are using all of the best practices. And I think this will be especially important, holding regular meetings so that you can check in about hours and time allotments. So unexpected things may come up, and the current duties that TAs have may take longer with this remote delivery. So as someone brought up earlier, you might be getting even more communications from students that are taking longer. You just don't really know. I think everybody's feeling a little bit uncertain about how things are going to go. So checking in about the hours, making sure that TAs are staying within their contracts and that you're making any adjustments necessary to ensure that they're not going over their hours and that they're feeling supported in those issues that come up. And so that's the second part of that, finding out about these recurring issues or additional support and resources that TAs might need as they get into their duties that you might not have anticipated at the beginning of the term. So the more you're checking in with TAs and getting a sense of what's actually going on in the tutorials or the labs or through the discussions or issues that students are having, the more you'll be able to deal with them and ensure that TAs are supported and are able to do their jobs as effectively as possible while also staying within their contract hours. Okay, so that's the end. So we'll open it up to questions and discussion now.